For that live report. And joining us now is Dr. Errol Southers. He is a Homeland Security and counterterrorism expert, also a former FBI SWAT agent, and was a Santa Monica police officer. Dr. Southers, thanks for being here once again.
Thank you for having me.
Based on your experience, what would be the first thing that you would be looking into when you got to the scene? And also, what would be some of the longer-term investigative data points that you'd be looking at?
Well, the first thing, obviously, we want to know who did this, but we want to know why. So motive is very, very important. So as we've already mentioned, it's Christmas Day. It's during the global pandemic. You've got a day where normally people would be downtown, but because of the pandemic, they're not. So we want to know why today, why that area of town. That's a very populated area of Nashville, so it's got extensive CCTV coverage. So I'd imagine that when that vehicle was parked some 4 or 5 hours prior to the detonation, that someone drove that vehicle there, parked it, and got away. That's going to be very interesting with regards to what was captured on CCTV. We'll want to know what kind of device it was. Was that a device that was remotely detonated, or was it timed, as is suggested by the audio that went out? What kind of ingredients made up that device? Was it ammonium nitrate? Was it triacetone triperoxide? All of those things will give the device a signature, which will give us some information with regards to who did it. But more importantly, as the investigation unfolds, when we get to the who, we'll be looking at information that is online. They'll be looking at people who may be boasting about doing it. They'll be talking to the people in that area to find out, especially AT&T, were there any threats to AT&T? Has a person been released or terminated recently? You know, these people who do these kinds of things, whether they be violent extremists, domestic or international, don't do random. So there's a reason why they picked this day. There's a reason why they picked that location. And there's a reason why they decided to have the audio go out so that when they had the 911 calls for shots fired, that people would not be in harm's way.
And you talk about looking at the video. I imagine whoever drove it there would be captured on numerous cameras. What about the RV itself? How important is it to find out about the origins of the RV, and how difficult is it to find out about the origins of the RV?
That's a very good question. And so the RV is parked there in a location where it probably wouldn't draw a whole lot of attention. An RV is not something that people are going to call and say it's suspicious. But what's interesting is it can carry a heavier load. So if you've got a device, regardless, we don't know how much was in that RV at this point, but it can carry a heavier load. It's interesting that an RV type device, at least Ryder trucks were used in 1993 at the World Trade Center. And an RV Ryder truck was used in Oklahoma City in 1995. What's very interesting about that is as these agents go out and sift through this material for evidence, they will reconstruct parts of that device, and they will reconstruct parts of that RV. We found the vehicle identification number, or the VIN number, on the Ryder truck that was used in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which was a crucial piece of evidence to linking them to the individuals who drove it underneath the World Trade Center. So that RV is going to be really important as this investigation goes on. Who drove it there, whether they owned it, was it rented, and more importantly, how large the device was that was in it. But they will piece that vehicle back together miraculously, even parts of that device, as they go forward.
And we just saw an image that was released by authorities on Twitter showing the RV, and you can see a kind of a figure in there, but obviously you can't see who it is. What does the methodology about how this was carried out tell you about the person or people involved?
Well, it tells me a couple of things. First of all, this was a very calculated attack. This was something that was played out. They knew where they were going to park it. They obviously wanted to draw law enforcement in. I'm assuming, since they had an audio that was moving people out of the area with instructions to evacuate, that they didn't want to see people harmed, but they definitely wanted to detonate this device. So they had to build an explosive device, which is no simple task. They had to get it into the vehicle, get it there on a date and time that they wanted to, have the audio play with the shots fired and to get people in there, as in first responders, and then have the audio to get people out. This was planned. It took time, it took resources, and it took information. And so I would imagine that as we go back and look at the investigation now, they'll be looking to see who may have even come to that location on trial runs or rehearsal runs. You know, today we've got so much access to closed circuit TV, they could have surveilled this from home with publicly available video cams that they didn't even have to go there. But they will be looking, meaning the investigators, they will be looking to see who visited there before. This is not something that someone did haphazardly. This was very methodically planned. They only knew they were going to get one opportunity to do it, and they were successful.
That's an interesting point about being able to construct it just based on video itself. You talk about, just coming from the law enforcement perspective, looking at past incidents like this with the Ryder truck, et cetera. Do you think this person also studied previous bombings and terrorism incidents?
That's a great question. That's what usually happens. I would imagine that this person has looked at those two bombings we just talked about in 93 and 95. They may have looked at similar attacks overseas. You know, vehicle-borne IEDs or VBIEDs are very common overseas, particularly in the Middle East. Many of those devices that are used in the Middle East are carrying what are called triacetylene triperoxide or TATP explosive inside of them. Nablus is the place where is the bomb maker's place of choice, if you will, with regards to where they do all the research on how to make these explosives. So I would imagine that whoever has done this has done their homework, has done the research, knows what they need. They also know that if you're trying to buy the type of ingredients that Timothy McVeigh used in 1995, that if you start buying quantities of a certain amount, you're going to trigger a lead or a tip to law enforcement. So they understand that as well. So this is not some person who doesn't understand the sophistication of bomb making and also the sophistication required in the operational part of the plan to getting the device where it has to be and having it detonate the way they wanted it to.
Dr. Suthers, thank you so much for your insight tonight. Appreciate
Thank you
having
for
you.
having me.